Hey, how's it going? My name is Wes. Welcome back to another lesson. Welcome to chapter number 3 actually. I'm very excited to have you starting with the first lesson of chapter number 3. I really hope that in the past 2 chapters I already provided you with a lot of information, and of course I hope to continue to do so in this chapter as well. Alright, so the first lesson of this new chapter, chapter number 3, lesson number 51. In this lesson I want to focus on how to form negative sentences in Spanish. And in some of the previous examples that we went over in previous lessons, we already looked at how to form some negative sentences, but I also really wanted to create a separate lesson which dives into the topic of forming negative sentences so that you can understand how negative sentences in Spanish are formed. So that's what this lesson is all about today. All right, without further ado, let's start with lesson number 51. Alright, so now before we dive into the negative sentences in Spanish, let's actually first look at what negative sentences are. So, as the name already suggests, a negative sentence is a sentence that states something that is false. Now, in English, one of the most common ways to form a negative sentence is by using a word, which is the word not, in a sentence. So, as some examples, you could say, I did not eat today, or I have not been to the gym, or I did not give you my keys. So these are all negative sentences. And so in English, we usually use this word not to make a sentence negative. So you could say, I did eat today, or you could say, I did not eat today. Or I have been to the gym, I have not been to the gym. I did give you my keys, I did not give you my keys. Now in Spanish, just like in English, we also have a common word that we can use to form negative sentences. Just like in English, we have the word not. In Spanish, this word is no. No. So, for example, hoy no comí. Hoy no comí. No he ido al gimnasio. No he ido al gimnasio. No te di mis llaves. No te di mis llaves. So this word no is pretty much the Spanish equivalent of the English word not. And one thing that's very important to know about this word no, how we use this word no, is that we always use it in front of a verb. So for example, in this example sentence, hoy no comí, which means I did not eat today, the word no comes in front of the verb. So comí is a conjugation of the verb comer. So it's a verb. So no, the word no comes in front of the verb. So we say hoy no comí. So we don't say hoy comí no, because then no comes after the verb. We always put it in front of the verb. So hoy no comí. Or no he ido al gimnasio. No he ido al gimnasio. So no he ido, not I have been, he ido, I have been, al gimnasio, to the gym. So not I have been to the gym. In English we say I have not been to the gym, but this word not comes after the verb have, to have. So in Spanish this is a bit different because we always put that word no in front of the verb. So no he ido al gimnasio. It's not he ido no al gimnasio. I have not been to the gym. No he ido al gimnasio. So that's one very important thing to understand about how we use this word no. That's different than how we use not in English. And then of course for the last example, no te di mis llaves, no te di mis llaves, I did not give you my keys, which literally translated means not te di, I gave you, mis llaves, my keys. So not I gave you my keys. And in English of course this becomes I did not give you my keys. But again, here we see that the word not comes after I did, and did comes from the verb to do. So in Spanish we flip this around, so we say no te di mis llaves. So not te di no mis llaves, but no te di mis llaves. I know I'm repeating myself, but it's very important that you get this point. So I hope that I'm explaining it in the best way that I can. Alright, let's move on to the next point. So far we understand that the Spanish language is actually quite similar to the English one when it comes to forming negative sentences, because they both have a word that we use to create a negative sentence. In English that's not, and in Spanish that's no. However, there is actually one more thing that I want you to understand, which is that in Spanish, unlike in English, we quite regularly actually use something called double negatives to create a sentence. So for example, in English you say, I do not see anybody. In Spanish, however, you say, no veo a nadie. And this word nadie doesn't mean anybody, but it means nobody. Because in English, if you would say, I do not see nobody, it would mean that you would see somebody. But in Spanish, you say, I don't see nobody, and you mean I don't see anybody. So this word anybody in English gets flipped into nobody when you translate it into Spanish. And the same thing goes, for example, for anything. So I do not need anything in Spanish becomes I do not need nothing. No necesito nada. I do not need nothing. So instead of anybody or anything, it becomes nobody or nothing. So that's another very important thing to notice about the Spanish language, which differs from the English language, that we use these things called double negatives. Now, when we form these double negatives, usually there are 4 popular words that we often use to form these sentences. So for the last part of this lesson, I want to dive into those 4 words to teach them to you so that you can use them and add them to your own vocabulary and start using them when you form these double negative sentences. Alright, so the first word that we often use in double negative sentences is the word nadie. Nadie, which means nobody. So for example, no conozco a nadie aquí. No conozco a nadie aquí. I do not know anybody here. And of course, literally translated, this is no conozco, I do not know, a nadie, to nobody, aquí, here. So nadie is nobody instead of the English anybody. And instead of saying aquí, which is more used in Spain, you can also say acá. So no conozco a nadie acá if you're in Latin America. Alright, then the second word that is very often used in negative sentences, double negative sentences, is nunca. Nunca, which means never. So for example, no bebo nunca café. No bebo nunca café. I never drink coffee. And the reason why it's called a double negative is because obviously we also use this word no. So no and nunca go together. As in the previous example, we saw no and nadie. So that's why it's called a double negative, because we use this word no, but then in combination with another word, such as nadie or nunca. And literally translated, no bebo nunca café means not, no, I drink, bebo, nunca, never, café, coffee. So not I drink ever coffee. And of course in English this becomes I never drink coffee. Alright, and just as a little side note, you might also hear nunca bebo café instead of no bebo nunca café. Nunca bebo café is a more natural version and it's also being used more often in the Spanish language. But for the sake of this lesson, I formed the sentence as no bebo nunca café just to explain the double negatives. But just so you know, in the real world, probably most likely, you will hear nunca bebo café. Alright, then the next word is nada. Nada, which means nothing. So for example, no tengo nada que hacer hoy. No tengo nada que hacer hoy. I do not have anything to do today. So nada means nothing, but if we translate it into English, we turn it into anything. And if we literally translate the sentence, it would say no tengo, which was I have, nada, nothing. So not I have nothing, que hacer, to do or to make, hoy, today. So not I have nothing to do or to make today, which in English becomes I do not have anything to do today. Alright, and then the last word that we often use in double negative sentences is ninguno. Ninguno, which means none. So for example, no tengo ninguno de los libros, which in English is I do not have any of the books. But the word ninguno means none. So literally translated, not I have none of the books. Alright, so then before we end this lesson, let's have a little recap of all the things we have learned in today's lesson. Alright, so the first thing we learned was that in Spanish, we use this word no, just like we use this word not in English to form a negative sentence. So, I did not eat today. Hoy no comí. Hoy no comí. I did not eat today. Or, I did not give you my keys. No te di mis llaves. No te di mis llaves. So that's the first thing. Now, the second thing that we learned was that unlike in the English language, in Spanish, we also use double negatives to form negative sentences. So I don't see anybody becomes I don't see nobody. I do not need anything becomes I do not need nothing. And then last but not least, we also learned the 4 most popular words that are very often used when we form double negative sentences, which were nadie, nunca, nada, and ninguno. Alright, then that's it for today's lesson. Thank you so much for watching. I truly hope you got something out of this. I hope that I explained myself well. If you have any more questions, please let me know. And that's it for this lesson. Thank you so much for watching. And of course, I hope to see you in the next one, lesson number 52. Alright, adios. bye.